Hello friends, today I will show you games 9 and 10 of the World Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Jan Nepomniachtchi. So let's start with the game 9. Jan was playing white and finally he went for something different from Ruy Lopez and something different from 1e4. And I think if he would make it somewhere in the beginning of the match, then it was very interesting and promising opening idea, opening line for him. Instead of 4 times trying to get something out of Ruy Lopez, where Magnus was very well prepared. So c4, e6, g3, d5, bishop g2, d4. White gives to black possibility to push d4, grabbing some space, but in return he gets some time to develop the pieces. So knight f3, knight c6 supporting the d4 pawn, castling, bishop c5, one more time, adding another defender for the d4 pawn, d3. So it's something like a reversed version of some g6, bishop, g7 structures. So here we have bishop on g2 and pawn on g3. It's even hard to call it as what is this reversed version of which opening. Something like maybe Volga Gambit, Benoni style, King's Indian, something in between. So knight f6, knight d2. Idea is simple, to go knight b3, so that's why a5 just in case. Knight b3 still. And since black doesn't want to place his bishop somewhere on a7, he went simply to e7. a4 is coming, so white should make something active, and e3 fighting for the center. Black is kind of forced to take on e3, bishop e3, and in case of castling, white can do something like knight d4 maybe. And his position is better, so that's why Magnus decided to go knight g4, attacking the bishop. And actually white doesn't really have a big choice, because after bishop f4 maybe we can do e5. In case of bishop c1, placing bishop back to c1 makes no sense. And d2 square is also not available for the bishop because of d3 pawn. So that's why bishop c5, castling, d4 occupying the center, a4 attacking the knight, bishop takes, queen takes, knight c5, a3. And it was an interesting moment here, because interestingly white could fight for something with unexpected move b4. Which of course he didn't play, and this move is not that easy to consider seriously. If knight b4, then rook b1. Knight takes a2 is not possible, because then knight is trapped. White can simply go queen d2, attacking the knight. So that's why black should go b6, because in case of knight c6, then simply knight takes b7 is possible. If knight c6, then knight takes b7. So that's why b6, attacking the knight, rook b4, pawn takes, rook b5, rook a6, rook c5, and white is better here, maybe not that much, but still better. Just in the game, after b takes a3, black is out of any risk, no problems for him at all. Simply rook d8, because we can always grab this pawn later. Now after a3, b takes a3, white's pawn structure is not that great at all. So knight b3 protecting the d4 pawn, over protecting the pawn. Simply knight f6, because actually knight on g4 did his job long time ago. As you remember, this knight was attacking the bishop on e3. So it's time to move it back to a better square, which is f6. Rook e1, finally black took on a3, queen e2. h6 is useful move, making a window for the king. And white did kind of similar stuff, h4, bishop d7. And in terms of strategy, black is perfectly fine. In case if we would imagine white pawn somewhere on b2, and of course black queen somewhere, let's say on e7, and maybe black pawn on a7, then white is definitely much better, because this bishop is, bishop on d7 is a bad piece. Black would have lack of space, but since with this a semi-open file, black is fine. He has some play here. White's pawn structure is far from a great one, so that's why white went for knight e5, bishop e8, queen e3, queen b4, rook b1, just knight takes e5, pawn takes e5, knight g4, queen e1, queen takes e1, rook takes e1, and black is perfectly fine here. Of course, there is important thing not to miss f3 trick, since this knight would be trapped. That's why black played h5. So actually we even don't have a moment to stop. So maybe let's stop for a while here. Also in the game it was bishop takes b7, something very concrete. The problem for white that actually there is nothing good for him in terms of strategy. So for example, his pawn structure is not that great at all. These pawns are weak, and in case if black would have some time here, then probably after rook a7 he's just better. Rook a7 protecting the b7 pawn, and black is perfectly fine. So that's why white should use, of course, taking on b7 is an obvious move. Rook a4 attacking the c4 pawn. And here, unfortunately for Jan, something went completely wrong. He just blundered a piece. Of course, he blundered it, not like just, let's say, playing knight d4 and giving it up by rook takes d4. No, he simply missed that his bishop on b7 did his job, and it was a good moment to move it back, maybe starting with f3 first, kicking away this knight, then after knight h6, bishop e4, and we cannot say that white has something here. Obviously position is just close to equal. Black can do either knight f5 or rook takes c4 is an option, and it leads just to trading of everything and probably to draw. But since Jan was already under this pressure, having a bad score in the match, like -2, then probably, of course, he's far from his best shape in terms of chess, and most important, not only in terms of chess, but in terms of his psychology, his mind, because there is no other explanation of c5 move, which is, by the way, far from fighting for the advantage. I mean, after c5, black can even making any move. Let's say rook d3, activating the rook, and black is even here. Black is slightly better because he has such a great activity, and white pieces protect the pawns. Like rook on a1 is protecting pawn on a2, this rook protecting pawn on e5, knight on b3 protecting pawn on c5. so they are far from being active. So this is a serious question why he went for this c5 move, because it's not a fight for, even if we skip black's main opportunity, which is just winning the game, it's still a big question. Why did he go for this c5 move? So let's, okay, play f3 and go to the slightly better position. After c5, unfortunately, after c6, white is completely lost. And they did some moves, but this guy on b7 is trapped, and there is no way to save the bishop. So in the game it was f3, knight h6, rook e4, and simply rook a7. Attacking the bishop, rook b4, rook b8, attacking it one more time. There are problem that even there is no trick such as bishop takes c6. So after rook takes b4, bishop takes e8, and we have this pin. So simply rook takes b3, and that's it. Because otherwise maybe at least some chances, or we can play for some more moves. So that's why in the game it was a4, simply rook b7, rook b6, rook takes. And well, being a piece up, of course Magnus is too strong. Simply knight f5, a5, rook b8. Only thing is important not to allow this pawn to promote to the queen. And c5. So covering all the possible ideas. Rook d8, and in the game it was knight c5, rook e8, and white resigns. And the good question, what would happen in case of knight b6 threatening a8 queen? And I guess simply bishop c6. And the problem for white that after a8 queen, bishop takes, no matter rook takes or knight takes, then black can go for knight f5, collecting one more pawn, also then maybe bringing his rook to d2, d3 or d5. So black is like 2-3 pawns up. That's more than enough. So this game, when I saw opening of this game, I thought that it will be interesting fight, and it would be an interesting fight in case if Jan went for this variation. Let's say in game he started with white color, so it means in game 3 of the match, maybe game 5 of the match, but not trying 4 times in a row to do something with Ruy Lopez, where Magnus was excellently prepared. And this game, actually, game number 9, it was interesting game till some moment, and like it was interesting fight before Jan just blundered c6, and that's it. But of course we should admit that he was like after 2 losses, of course he's far from his best in terms of chess, in terms of psychology, in terms of mind, and I believe that game, the game that he lost in 136 move, of course it was very painful for him. So then after that game he played much lower than he can play. Game 10 of the match, and of course being -3, as we used to say on professional language, chess language, or 6-3, out of 9 games. Of course, score is terrible, and Jan needs a miracle to do something, to come back, which is hard to imagine. Magnus losing 3 games on such a short distance. And also for this game, Magnus was playing white, and in fact, not much happened in this game. It was, as we used to say, quite boring game, maybe grandmaster draw without any problems for each side. Magnus went for e4, one more check in Petrov defense. So knight f3, knight f6. Jan went for the Petrov once again. Knight e5, d6, and knight d3. So by the way, pay attention to the difference between opening preparation. This is third game in Petrov, and each time Magnus went for different line, comparing to Jan's try against Ruy Lopez, where he 4 times he went for more or less similar stuff. So knight d3, knight e4. Knight d3 of course seems to be a bit weird, but the idea that after knight e4, queen e2, queen e7, this knight leads to f4, where he is more or less well placed. And there is threat of knight d5, that's why knight f6 simply covering d5 square, d4. And black has different possibilities. He can simply go maybe first taking on e2, and then go for d5, which is also slightly better for white. Knight c6 is a possible move. c3, d5, knight d2, knight d8. Looks a bit weird, but it's funny. Think like in Western, white queen aiming black queen, and like each side doesn't want to take on e2 or e7 first, like getting some tempo on it. So knight d8, knight f3, and eventually black was forced to take on e2 because probably knight e5 is coming, queen e2, bishop e2. Yes, and by the way, knight d8 idea that actually this knight on c6 is badly placed, and it's much better to have pawn on c6 and to remove this knight somewhere, so that's why knight d8. Also trading this knight on f4. So knight f3, queen takes, bishop d6, castling, bishop d3, rook e8, placing the rook to open file, rook e1. Maybe it was possible simply to go for bishop d2, but okay, rook e1, rook takes, and knight e6. White doesn't really resist to any trades, because for Magnus draw is also a good result, because like with such a score 6-3, he needs to get just 1.5 point to become world champion. Not to become world champion, but to defend his title. So knight e6, bishop takes, g3. Idea is usually in such structure we consider such bishop, for example, this bishop for white we consider as bet1, and this bishop bet1 for black. So both sides usually try to trade these bishops, and white's idea to go for knight g2 and followed by bishop f4. And black did kind of similar, at least like probably idea, also a bit later. Rook e8, f3, covering e4 square, maybe also g4 just in case, and always we can do king f2, knight h5, king f2. So yes, here black went for this idea, just another road, not knight e8, knight g7, but knight h5, knight g7, c6, g4, knight g7. And since white was able to place pawn to g4, covering f5 square, not allowing bishop f5, so black did it in another way. After bishop f4, he took on f4, knight takes f4, and g5. Actually, sometimes this bishop, like for example, this bishop looks pretty bad, but sometimes it's a good defender, and this bishop is not that great. Sometimes, but of course it depends on level of the players. White's idea maybe to go for h4, then maybe h5, grabbing some space. Also, black is very solid here, so even g5 is not necessary, but g5 is perfectly fine. Knight e2 and f5, grabbing some space on the king side. And actually, if white allows black to play, let's say f4, then black has some space advantage on the king side, and maybe he can even play for something. But the point that after h3 it's too early to play f4 because of h4 followed by rook h1. So that's why first he went for king f7. And still rook h1. So once again, in case of f4, grabbing some space and maybe having some ideas, because it would be better for black. But okay, maybe here it's first of all bishop takes h7 exists, but even h4 is perfectly fine for white. So that's why black went for h6. Maybe still having in mind f4 idea. So that's why white was simply went for f4, trading everything. So f takes, pawn takes, bishop takes g4, rook takes h6. Of course, probably after bishop takes e2, bishop takes e2, pawn takes f4, white would be able to grab f4 pawn is more or less quickly. Actually, probably rook h4. It's very easy to grab this pawn back. For example, knight e6, then simply bishop h5. But actually, after bishop e2, black would lose the game after bishop g6. And then bishop takes e8 and taking the bishop on e2. So that's why simply bishop f5, bishop takes, knight takes, rook h7 check, knight g7, white won the pawn, but after king g6 there is no way to protect it. So after rook h3, king g5, rook g3, king f6, we have just symmetrical position, absolutely equal position. Rook f3, king e7, and they did some moves to reach move 40 to offer a draw. Knight e5, knight e8. And okay, knight on e5 is better for white, of course, than knight on e8, but still there is like no resource to play for something. And after rook f7, rook f6, rook takes knight f6, just dead draw. Of course, against more or less same class, same level opponents. Maybe for somebody it would be still possible to lose this position, but of course here they just agreed for draw. And we have 6.5, 3.5 score. Magnus needs to make to score one more point out of these 4 games. So like maybe in next 2 games match will be over. I mean, in case of, for example, 2 draws, it will be score 7.5 against 4.5, and match would be over once one of the opponent scores 7.5 points. So game 10 was not really something to like even to talk about. Quite boring game. But maybe it was good for Jan since he played black and to have rest, and it will be important game 11 where he will try his last chance to do something with white. So let's see what happened.